The boy who vanished in 1986 and returned 20 years later. What if a 10-year-old boy walked out of school one afternoon and never came home? Where can a child vanish without a trace and without a single witness? Why did his name fade into silence for 20 years, only to resurface in the most unexpected way? What secrets were buried with time? And who was the stranger that changed everything? This isn't just a story about disappearance. It's a story about time, truth, and the return no one saw coming. Ashfield, Oregon, March 3rd, 1986. The morning was quiet, like most mornings in Ashfield. The town was small, tucked between evergreens and winding roads, where everyone knew each other's names and locked doors were more of a habit than a necessity. The cold air of early spring lingered, with patches of snow still holding their ground in shaded corners. Ellen Rivers stood by the kitchen window, watching the school bus pass by, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee. Her son, Michael, had insisted on walking to school that day. He was 10, stubborn, and proud of his independence. The elementary school was only 3 blocks away, and she'd finally given in after weeks of him asking. He had left the house at 7:40 a.m., blue backpack bouncing against his back, a grin on his face. He never came home. The day passed normally. Ellen did the laundry, called her husband Jim during his lunch break, and even baked a small tray of cookies. Chocolate chip, Michael's favorite. At exactly 3:15 p.m., she stood at the front window, expecting to see him coming down the sidewalk like always. But the sidewalk stayed empty. By 3:40, she felt the first stir of unease. At 4 o'clock, she called the school. A woman at the office told her that Michael had been marked present and had left the building with the rest of the students at dismissal time. By 4:15, she was in the car, driving slowly along the route from school to home. By 5 o'clock, she called Jim. By 6 o'clock, the police were at her door. Officers went door to door. They questioned children and teachers, searched the school grounds, the nearby park, and the woods behind the neighborhood. A group of local volunteers joined in by flashlight, calling out his name until their voices cracked. At 10:17 p.m., they found one thing: a single blue and white sneaker, size 3, left shoe. It was lying near the creek behind the schoolyard, damp and covered in mud. There were no footprints around it, no signs of a struggle, just a shoe sitting at the edge of the water as if someone had placed it there. The officer handed the shoe to Ellen in a sealed bag. She didn't cry. She just stared at it, her hands trembling as if trying to will it to speak. That night, Jim sat in the hallway outside Michael's room, not saying a word. Ellen lay awake in bed, eyes on the ceiling, heart hollow. Michael's bed remained untouched, the covers neatly folded, the pillow fluffed the way she left it that morning. The lights in the neighborhood slowly went out, one by one. But the Rivers house stayed awake, lit by fear, silence, and a growing, impossible question. Where did he go? The following morning, Ashfield woke up to a town in shock. Word of Michael Rivers' disappearance had spread fast. His schoolmates whispered in the hallways. Parents walked their children to class for the first time in years. Strangers began stopping by the Rivers' home with casseroles and prayers. The small town that had always felt safe now pulsed with a quiet fear. If a boy could vanish in broad daylight, what else could happen? Detective Harold Bennett was assigned to the case. He was in his early 50s, seasoned, quiet, and methodical. He didn't believe in rushing. He believed in details. His team set up a command center at the local precinct and pinned Michael's school photo to the center of the board. Around it, they began adding questions, names, maps, and schedules, but very few answers. The search continued through the weekend. Officers combed through creeks, barns, sheds, and storm drains. Helicopters flew over the nearby forest. Search dogs traced Michael's scent to the edge of the creek. And then, nothing. The trail ended as if he had vanished into the air. No ransom call came, No sightings, no suspicious vehicles reported, no sign of a struggle, no witnesses. On Monday, the school reopened, but Michael's desk remained empty. His best friend, Daniel Perez, stared at it for most of the day. When Detective Bennett came to interview the kids, Daniel hesitated before speaking. "He was fine at recess," Daniel said, picking at the corner of his sleeve. "He gave me his peanut butter cookie at lunch. Then, I don't know. I saw him walking toward the back gate after the bell. I thought he was taking the shortcut through the field." The shortcut, a narrow path that led through a patch of tall grass behind the school, was technically off-limits to students, but many used it to shave off a few minutes from their walk home. The field was searched again. Nothing new. Back at home, Ellen stopped cooking. She didn't sleep. She barely spoke. She sat by the phone for hours, listening to the dial tone. Jim, who had always been the quiet one, now tried to fill the silence with plans, ideas, flyers, anything to keep from thinking. He printed 100 copies of Michael's picture and stapled them to poles around town. Each one read, "Missing, Michael Rivers age, 10 last seen, March 3rd, 1986, Ashfield Elementary. Wearing red flannel shirt, jeans, blue backpack. The shoe, that single left sneaker, was sent for analysis. No blood, no DNA from anyone else, just dirt and water." The forensic lab gave nothing helpful. It was, as the detective called it, a ghost trace. After 2 weeks, the television news arrived. A reporter from Portland stood in front of Ashfield Elementary, holding a microphone while a cameraman filmed the now familiar photo of Michael taped to the entrance. The country saw his freckled face and bright smile. And then, like all stories not tied to danger or scandal, the media moved on. But Ellen didn't move on. Every night she left the porch light on. Every Saturday she drove to the same creek, stood by the spot where the shoe was found, and whispered his name, Michael. And the town slowly returned to its rhythm. Schools reopened, streets filled with chatter, church bells rang on Sundays. But something had shifted. There was now a scar in the quiet heart of Ashfield. And for the Rivers family, the worst part wasn't just that Michael was gone. It was that no one could tell them how or why. By the end of March 1986, 3 weeks after Michael's disappearance, the official tone of the investigation changed. The language shifted from urgency to endurance. Officers stopped knocking on doors every evening. The daily search parties dwindled. Volunteers, once eager and determined, returned to their jobs, their children, their routines. Even Detective Bennett, though still quietly devoted, knew the shift had come. When a case moves from a missing child to a cold file. For the Rivers family, it was not just a change in vocabulary. It was a sharp turn into isolation. Ellen stopped answering the phone. Sympathy started to feel like noise. People meant well. They always do. But the casseroles and gentle hugs began to disappear along with the search efforts. At night, she sat in Michael's room, listening to his old cassette tapes. She'd press play on the little red recorder next to his bed and hear his voice from just weeks earlier. "Hi, Mom, this is Michael. If you're listening, that means I'm grounded." Again. She'd laugh, or try to, then cry, always in silence. Jim returned to work at the local hardware store. He didn't talk about Michael. He didn't talk much at all. He simply showed up, tightened his jaw, and got through the day. At home, he built things. A new fence, a new kitchen shelf, a wooden box that no one asked for. When Ellen once asked why, he said, "If I stop moving, I'll fall apart." The local police had no new leads, no suspects, no evidence. Detective Bennett requested assistance from the state, but was denied. Ashfield was too small, too quiet, and Michael's case lacked the indicators that attracted larger investigations. No known abductor, no video evidence, no suspicious adult in the area. But Bennett kept digging. He went back through school records. He interviewed the teachers again, the janitor, the crossing guard. He reviewed the bus schedules and checked the local construction sites. Nothing suspicious, nothing odd. Except for one thing, a name. Tom Keller. A substitute teacher who had filled in for Michael's homeroom class the day before he disappeared. Keller had no prior complaints, no criminal record, no history worth mentioning. But Bennett found it strange that he had taken a leave of absence just days after Michael vanished, citing personal reasons. He had also moved out of town shortly after. When Bennett tracked him down in Southern California and questioned him briefly over the phone, Keller sounded cooperative, almost too cooperative. He denied everything. He barely remembered the boy. He said all the right things. Still, something lingered in Bennett's mind. That kind of memory, that moment when a child disappears under your watch, should haunt you. But Keller seemed untouched. Bennett wrote it in his notes. But with no evidence, no warrant, and no probable cause, the lead went nowhere. Back at school, Michael's name slowly stopped being said aloud. His chair was removed. His cubby was emptied. New students arrived, and with time, some didn't even know there had ever been a boy named Michael Rivers. But for the Rivers family, time did not heal. Time only deepened the wound. On April 12th, Ellen received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a sheet of loose-leaf paper, and on it, written in a childlike scrawl, "He's not coming back." The handwriting didn't match Michael's. There were no fingerprints, no clues, just those 4 words. Jim brought it to the police. Forensics found nothing. No DNA, no traceable ink. Another dead end. But that letter broke something in Ellen. For the first time since March 3rd, she screamed. She ripped it up, then collapsed in the hallway, whispering Michael's name again and again. And Detective Bennett, now with a new piece of a broken puzzle, pinned the letter beside the shoe photo in his office. 2 objects, no answers, and a silence that was beginning to feel like permanence. Spring turned to summer, and then summer faded into fall. 1986 passed. Then 1987. And then another year and another. By 1990, 4 years had passed since Michael Rivers walked out of Ashfield Elementary School and vanished. The world changed. New presidents were elected, technology advanced, the Berlin Wall fell. But inside the Rivers home, time had frozen. Michael's bedroom remained untouched. His baseball glove still sat on the shelf. His favorite red flannel shirt, the one he wore the day he disappeared, hung on the back of his closet door, now collecting dust. Ellen still cleaned his room once a week, as if expecting him to come home and notice anything out of place. Jim, by contrast, had become distant. He spoke even less now, his face permanently lined with quiet exhaustion. Though he never said it out loud, he had begun to believe Michael was gone for good. But Ellen never stopped believing. She joined support groups for parents of missing children. She read books on survival and trauma. She drove across the state every time someone claimed to have seen a boy who looked like Michael. Every tip ended in heartbreak. In 1991, the Ashfield Police Department formally closed Michael's case, reclassifying it as a cold file. Detective Bennett, frustrated but out of leads, was transferred to another district. Before leaving, he boxed up the evidence, the shoe, the anonymous letter, the case files, and labeled them with a thick red stamp. Unresolved. But he couldn't let it go. In his final days on the job, he visited Ellen. He stood at her door, hat in hand. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I wanted to bring him home." Ellen simply nodded. "He's still out there. I can feel it." In the years that followed, life in Ashfield moved on. Children grew up. New families moved in. The town painted over the fading posters of Michael Rivers. His disappearance became a local legend, spoken of in low tones and half memories. He became That boy who vanished. A name known more for mystery than for who he was. And then, in 1995, nearly a decade after the disappearance, something unexpected happened. A young police cadet named Eva Collins, just out of the academy, was assigned to the Ashfield precinct. She was bright, determined, and unusually obsessed with missing persons cases. Her interest wasn't casual. It was personal. Eva had grown up in a town similar to Ashfield. Her cousin had vanished when she was a child. The case was never solved. So, when she came across Michael's file in the cold case archive, she didn't just skim it. She read every page. She laid the shoe and the letter on her desk. She mapped the timeline, highlighted the inconsistencies, and began asking questions no one had asked in years. Why was there no follow-up with the substitute teacher, Tom Keller? Why was the letter dismissed so quickly? Why did Michael's trail end so abruptly behind the school? A public place, with no witnesses? Eva began quietly reinvestigating the case on her own time. She visited the school grounds, now remodeled. She found the old creek, still flowing, still cold. She tracked down former classmates, now in their 20s, and re-interviewed them. Most remembered little. But one former student, Jessica Miller, recalled something odd. "I remember that day," Jessica said. "Michael was walking home, like always. But I also remember a red car, parked near the back fence of the school. It wasn't usually there. It just didn't fit." Eva logged it. No record of a red car in the original investigation. No follow-up. And then, in the bottom of the archived file box, she found something strange. An evidence envelope marked "Unknown, Not Relevant." Inside was a key, small, rusted, and unlabeled. It had been found near the creek but dismissed. Eva stared at it for a long time. Something didn't sit right. She made a decision. She visited Ellen Rivers. The door opened slowly. Ellen had aged, her hair grayer, her eyes quieter. But her posture straightened when Eva introduced herself. "I'm a new officer," Eva said gently, "and I'm looking into your son's case." Ellen's lips trembled. "After all this time?" Eva nodded. "I don't think it's over. Not yet." For the first time in years, someone had said what Ellen believed all along. Somewhere out there, Michael Rivers was still waiting to be found. By early 2006, 20 years since Michael Rivers had vanished, Officer Eva Collins had gathered more on the cold case than anyone since Detective Bennett. But it was what happened on March 2nd, 2006, the day before the 20th anniversary, that changed everything. At exactly 8:12 a.m., a small manila envelope arrived at the Ashfield Police Department. It was addressed by hand in block letters to Ashfield Police Department, Cold Cases, Division Etienne, Eva Collins. There was no return address, no postage stamp. Someone had physically dropped it off. Inside the envelope were two items. 1. A recent photograph of a man in his late 20s or early 30s, standing on a street corner somewhere unfamiliar. He had light brown hair, green eyes, and a small scar under his left eye. 2. A folded sheet of lined paper, written in blue ink in clear adult handwriting. "I am Michael Rivers. I don't know if I can ever come home, but I want to be found." Eva's heart stopped. She rushed the photo to forensics. They compared it to the childhood photo of Michael using facial recognition software. The preliminary result? 86% match. She immediately contacted Ellen Rivers. When Ellen saw the photo, her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. "It's him," she whispered. "That scar. He got it falling off his bike when he was 8. Jim, standing in the doorway, said nothing. He stared at the photo for a long time. Then he simply nodded once and left the room. Eva began the process of tracking the location in the image. There was a small corner store sign visible behind the man. She scanned the photo digitally, enhanced the lettering, and traced the store to a city in Nevada over 600 miles from Ashfield. A few phone calls and a police contact in Las Vegas later, she had a lead. The man in the photo went by the name Daniel Cross. No social security number until 1998. No medical history prior to that. No school enrollment before age 13. He worked part-time at a bookstore, lived in a modest apartment, had no criminal record, and mostly kept to himself. Ava made the trip herself. When she arrived at the bookstore, she asked to speak to Daniel Cross. A soft-spoken man with quiet eyes stepped out from the back. His face looked older than 30, as if time had bent heavily over his shoulders. She held out the photo. "I believe you sent this," she said. He looked at it, then at her, then slowly nodded. "I think my name was Michael," he said softly. "Once." They sat together for nearly 2 hours. He told her what he remembered. Not much. Just flashes. A cold creek, a red car, a man who smelled like tobacco and pine. Then nothing. Until he was waking up in a trailer far from Ashfield with no name, no memory, and no explanation. The man who raised him was never cruel, but never loving either. He gave him a new name, Daniel. Told him his parents had died. Told him the past didn't matter. And Daniel believed him. Until, at age 18, the man died in a car accident. And only then did the dreams begin. Of a woman calling his name in the dark. A boy in a red flannel shirt. A shoe by a creek. Eva asked him why he had waited so long to come forward. "I wasn't sure if I was real," he said, "and I didn't want to destroy their lives if I was wrong." Back in Ashfield, the Rivers' home was still and quiet. Ava knocked on their door on March 3rd, exactly 20 years to the day since Michael disappeared. When Ellen opened it and saw the man standing behind the officer, her knees buckled. She collapsed into his arms without a word, tears pouring down her face. Jim stood behind them in the hallway, staring. Then he stepped forward, looked into the man's eyes, and whispered, "Mike." Michael nodded. No words passed after that. Just a long, trembling embrace that tried to reclaim what time had stolen. Later that night, the house was filled with soft light and silence. A different kind of silence. Not the silence of grief, but of awe, of reunion, of rebuilding. Yet something hung in the air. How had he disappeared? Who was the man who took him? Why was there no trace? Ava knew the case was far from over. Michael was home. But the truth, the full truth, was still out there, waiting. Michael Rivers was home, but home no longer felt like the place he had left behind. Ashfield had changed. New buildings, new faces, a new rhythm. But more than that, Michael himself had changed. He was a man now, shaped by a life lived in shadows, in half-truths, and in someone else's name. After the emotional reunion, the days that followed were filled with questions. Some spoken, many left in the silence between them. Ellen hovered close, watching his every move with quiet awe. She would gently touch his hand, his shoulder, his face, just to be sure he was real. Jim, on the other hand, was more reserved. He kept his emotions guarded, watching his son with the kind of stare that seemed to ask, "Where have you been?" But he never actually asked it. Eva Collins reopened the case officially, now with Michael's testimony at the center. She interviewed him again, this time with a recorder running, a notepad on her knee, and the door closed. Michael described fragments, the same ones he had shared in Nevada. A red car, the sound of tires on gravel, the blur of pine trees. A man, tall, rough hands, always wearing a green cap. Never called him by name, never told him the truth. He only remembered being in a small trailer in the woods, and later, in a rundown house in California. He was never harmed, never locked up, But he was never free either. "I didn't know I was missing," Michael said. "He made it feel like I had always been there." Eva pressed gently. "What about the man? Did he ever say his name?" Michael paused. Then, "He told others to call him Ray. But I don't think that was his real name." She dug into the archives, searched through records of men named Ray, or Raymond, who had lived near Ashfield in 1986 and later moved west. She contacted California records offices, searched property deeds, DMV databases, parole logs. She submitted the DNA Michael had left on file from the recent investigation to run it against any prior familial links. One thread finally tugged loose. A man named Ray Ellis, deceased since 1998, had lived briefly in a cabin northwest of Ashfield in early 1986, less than 2 miles from the school. He had no children, no spouse, and no job record. His name appeared briefly in a complaint by a neighbor about strange behavior and loud yelling, but no charges had been filed. Ray Ellis had vanished from town just days after Michael's disappearance. No one had noticed. No one had asked. Eva drove out to where the cabin once stood. It was now collapsed, overtaken by trees and moss. But the foundations remained. As she stepped over the rotting wood, she found something lodged between floorboards. A small leather strap, like one from a child's backpack. Faded blue. Back at the station, she compared it to photos of Michael's old backpack from 1986. The stitching matched. It was the first physical evidence directly linking anyone to Michael's disappearance. When Eva told Michael, he didn't cry. He just sat quietly for a long time, hands folded in his lap. "He's dead?" he finally asked. Eva nodded. "He died in a highway accident 8 years ago. Alone. No ID at the time. Just a fingerprint match to an old arrest in the 70s. Michael let out a breath. Not relief, not grief, just release. The media got wind of the story. Soon the headlines read, "Boy missing since 1986. Found alive after 20 years. Michael Rivers returns. Cold case breaks wide open." Journalists camped outside the Rivers house. Cameras flashed. Ellen refused interviews. Jim threatened to call the police. Michael remained inside, trying to relearn what it meant to exist in a world that thought he was long gone. Eva tried to protect him from it all. She worked quietly, filtering the noise, keeping the investigation focused. But even she couldn't stop the tidal wave of attention. Despite the noise, something more personal began to unfold. One evening, Eva sat across from Michael on the front porch. The town was quiet, the stars beginning to blink above the treetops. "I keep thinking," Michael said, "about the boy I was, the 10-year-old who just wanted to walk home from school." Eva nodded slowly. "And?" she asked. "I think he's still out there somewhere," he said. "Frozen, waiting to understand why everything disappeared around him." Eva didn't speak. She knew that kind of wound. The kind that doesn't bleed. It echoes. But even in the quiet, something had shifted. For the first time in 20 years, there was a path forward. Not to erase the past, but to face it. To finally walk home. As spring settled over Ashfield in 2006, the town began adjusting to a new reality. One where Michael Rivers was no longer a mystery, but a man returned. Yet for Michael, the adjustment was far more complicated. The world he had re-entered was fast, loud, and unfamiliar. Technology had leapt ahead 2 decades. Cell phones, the internet, digital everything. Even small things felt strange. The way people spoke, the music on the radio, the brands in the grocery store. The toys he once loved were now considered vintage, and children stared at screens instead of riding bikes. More than once, Michael caught himself looking out the window, wondering if he'd truly come home. Or if he'd just stepped into another unfamiliar place, like all the ones before. Meanwhile, Ava Collins continued working quietly behind the scenes. Though the main suspect, Ray Ellis, was confirmed dead, Ava wasn't satisfied. Questions still hovered. How had Ellis abducted Michael in broad daylight with no one seeing? Why didn't he ever leave a trace? And most of all, why Michael? Michael met regularly with a trauma counselor. Sessions were long and difficult. He began to access buried memories, not vivid scenes, but sensations, fragments. The scratch of Ellis's beard, the sound of the red car's engine, the smell of burnt wood inside the trailer. He remembered Ellis warning him, "Don't talk about the before." The before was a lie. He also remembered something strange. A box locked, which Ellis never let him touch. In it, he believed, were items from Michael's early life. Maybe pictures, papers, maybe even the backpack that went missing. Eva traced Ellis's final years and discovered that after leaving Oregon, he'd briefly lived in a mobile home park in northern Nevada. She made the trip herself. The trailer had since been sold and gutted, but the property manager remembered Ray. He kept to himself, the man recalled. Always seemed on edge. Came in with a kid once. Said it was his nephew. Eva searched through storage records. Ellis had rented a small storage unit under a different name, Robert D. Carter. She obtained a warrant. Inside the dusty unit was a single metal trunk sealed with a padlock. When it was opened, the contents confirmed what Michael remembered, and more. Inside the trunk were a faded school folder labeled Michael Rivers, Grade 4, a blue backpack, the strap torn, matching the piece Eva had found at the cabin, a cassette tape, unmarked, a children's book with Michael's name scribbled inside, and, most hauntingly, a page torn from a yearbook. Showing Michael's fourth-grade class, Eva brought the items back to Ashfield. When Michael saw the backpack, his hands trembled. He opened it slowly, pulling out a small plastic toy, one he thought had been lost forever, a gift from his mother on his 10th birthday. He wept quietly, holding it to his chest, but it was the cassette tape that held the greatest mystery. When Eva played it, what they heard stunned them both. A recording of Ray Ellis, his voice calm but strange. "To whoever finds this, I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted to give him a better life. I saw what they were doing, always yelling, always tired. He looked so sad walking alone. I thought, maybe I could fix it. Maybe I could be the one to save him from the life he was going to have." He paused. "I know they'll call it kidnapping, but it wasn't like that. I fed him, I clothed him, I read to him, I raised him right." And then a chilling final line. "But I know he'll leave me someday, they always do." The tape ended. Michael sat in silence, absorbing the weight of it. He finally spoke. "He thought he was saving me, but he erased me." Eva nodded, her voice steady. "It's over now, Michael. He's gone, and you're here." That night, Michael walked the streets of Ashfield alone for the first time since his return. He passed by his old school. It looked different, but something in the windows, the shape of the trees, still felt familiar. And for a moment, under the soft glow of the streetlight, he could almost see a 10-year-old boy walking ahead of him, blue backpack bouncing, flannel shirt catching the breeze. He followed him, just for a few steps. Then he stopped. The boy faded into the night, and Michael finally turned toward home. Summer came to Ashfield in 2006 with warm winds, green trees, and a strange sense of calm. The kind that comes not from resolution, but from exhaustion. The town had been through something it never expected. A 20-year mystery, and a return that felt more like a quiet miracle than a headline. But for the Rivers family, the true ending had not come with a knock on the door or a press release. It came in the slow, silent work of healing. Michael, now 30 years old, had begun to rebuild his life piece by piece. He stayed in Ashfield, at least for a while. He moved into a small rental house on the edge of town. His parents offered to have him live with them, but Michael declined gently. "I need to learn how to exist again," he told Ellen, "not just remember who I was." He spent mornings walking through neighborhoods that had changed. He sometimes sat in the park near the elementary school, listening to kids play, wondering if his laughter had ever sounded like that. In the afternoons, he volunteered at the town library, sorting books and helping children find stories, something he'd never had during his missing years. His parents visited often. Ellen brought him meals, photos, and questions she was too afraid to ask. Jim brought tools, helped fix shelves, and quietly passed on old things. A baseball, a box of childhood drawings, a wooden toy car they had built together before the disappearance. Conversations were not always easy. There were awkward silences, misplaced words, emotions too large to explain. But love persisted, not in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday ways. Waiting, listening, remembering. Eva Collins, the young officer who had reopened the case, stayed in contact with Michael. The case file was now officially closed. The evidence was archived. Ray Ellis, the man who had taken Michael, was confirmed to have acted alone. No charges would ever be filed. There would be no trial, no courtroom, no justice in the traditional sense. But Eva knew that justice sometimes meant something else. The truth, revealed. A name given back. A boy returned to the people who never stopped searching for him. On August 10th, 2006, nearly 5 months after Michael returned, Ashfield held a quiet gathering in the town hall. It wasn't a celebration exactly, more like a recognition. They called it, "Welcome Back, Michael." Neighbors who remembered him came. Former classmates, now adults. Teachers who had once feared the worst. There were no speeches, just music, food, and soft conversations. Michael stood in the back of the room for most of it, overwhelmed by the warmth. At one point, a little boy came up to him, no older than 10, and asked, "Were you scared?" Michael knelt beside him, smiled gently, and said, "Yeah, but I found my way back." That night, he sat with Eva on the same porch where they had first spoken months earlier. "You ever think about leaving Ashfield?" she asked. "All the time," he said, "but not yet." "Why?" He looked out over the quiet street, the windows glowing gold. "Because sometimes, healing means staying long enough to forgive the past." Eva nodded. "And sometimes, it means forgiving yourself too." Michael smiled. It was small, but real. In the weeks that followed, life continued. Ellen returned to her part-time job at the library. Jim joined a local workshop and started building again. Michael enrolled in a night class in psychology. Curious now about memory, trauma, and identity. He would carry the weight of those lost years for the rest of his life. But he also carried something else now. A future. And though the boy who vanished in 1986 would never fully return, the man who came back in 2006 was here. Alive, loved, and finally home.